Okay, thank you everybody for taking time out of your morning, afternoon, evening, or watching this after the fact, wherever you're at. We really appreciate you taking the time to come learn with us. We'll wait just a moment here for everybody to come on in. Hopefully, wherever you're at in the US or the world right now, you are hunkered down and safe because it is a unique year. We'll put it that way. Okay, we'll get rolling here. So first of all, this is past community news. This is the HADR virtual chapter for August 2020. If you have not already signed up for the past summit this year, please, 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 we beat this to like a dead horse for years now. This is the best SQL Server conference that you can go to. So both SQL Server and Microsoft Data Platform components. It is virtual this year due to COVID-19, but you know what? That's okay. It means it's going to be more accessible to people who aren't usually able to travel into Seattle or wherever it's held at. So take the time, go look at everything that is being announced. I mean, there's just incredible content. Find out more with the link down at the bottom. Please register. They've actually reduced the prices from normal to make it more agreeable with everybody, and go check it out. It's an amazing show. If you have not checked out some of the other virtual chapters, and I'm hoping you all have, there's about 20 different virtual chapters out, and there's just oodles of really good information all over the place. And if you can't make them in the time windows that they normally meet, no problem. They're all recorded. They'll all be out on YouTube for you to watch after the fact. If you are looking for a job, or recruiting for a really good candidate, go check it out. Pass has a career center. It is well worth your time to go peruse there. And if you're looking for a job, go get your information up there. This community is absolutely incredible. You'd be in a really good spot to get your info out there. So if you have not already connected with PASS, and chances are you have, they've got some really good information out there. A free membership out at pass.org. They're on all the usual social media channels. Just great information. So let's turn this over to Brandon. So I'm going to turn this over to you. I'll make you a presenter there. So this is Brandon Leach. The title of today's session is called Failing Over Availability Groups the Sane Way. So I'd love to see a follow-up session called The Insane Way.
Well, the insane way is fairly easy. Don't do anything, don't do any checks, just roll the dice.
Works for me. So if anybody has any questions at all through this entire session, please put them in the questions window here. What we'll do is we'll have breakpoints through the periods in the session, and we'll be sure to answer all your questions.
Awesome. So thank you, David. Um, give you an idea of who I am and why I'm here. I am a vice president in database operations for a financial company in the New York City area. I'm not actually allowed to name which company, but there's a good chance, a non-zero chance that if my company crashes and burns, so does your 401k. Let's hope that doesn't happen. Anyways, to give you an idea of our infrastructure, we have approximately 6 petabytes plus of data spread across 1,800 SQL Server instances with hundreds of availability groups, etc. So we can't do things manually. I don't like to do things manually, so we automate. And when we're talking about availability groups, you know, we don't necessarily want to do things manually either, right? So doing things manually, rarely consistent. I went over this last time I was here. If you attended that session, a few of these slides will, remind you. We're human. We make mistakes. I have a team of 4 to manage that 6 petabyte environment underneath me. There's no way that I could or my team could realistically manage that environment without automating. We need consistency. Then there's the time suck as well, because, if I have to click here, move the mouse, double check on this screen over there, that's going to create an issue as well. Things are going to take longer than they should. Um, If it takes you 3 days to manually build out an availability group, well, if you automate it, it might only take you a day or a few hours, right? So trying to save time. Plus, more sleep. Automation can detect issues and kick off processes. So before we get into the heart of this, which is how we can sanely do automated checks for our failovers, we're going to discuss what should be automated. And that's whatever tests you have to do more than once is generally a good good candidate there. So usually once I've defined something I think could be a good fit for automation, I'll look at the amount of work involved to automate it versus the amount of work of not doing it. So is it something that we're going to run repeatedly? I found my team was responding to cloning issues almost every night. Obviously, that's not acceptable to me. I need my team to get sleep. So I asked one of my reports to look into automating this procedure, and it took him about a month to do it. That includes code reviews, testing. But the nice thing is, we already had our steps documented in a wiki for how we were going to fix that. So he went and he built a flow chart based on those steps, and that became the basis for the automation. This meant that he had something to work off. He knew exactly how to write his code, right, to get an initial draft of this script done. We tested that initial draft, and then we took it a step further. We said, what parts of this can we strip out, create custom cmdlets for reuse? What makes sense there, right? And so we did that, and now we have a module that allows us to, clone a server on demand. It will call out to VMware for snapshots. It will do all sorts of cool things that we don't have to do and deal with manually. All right. So when we talk about failing over availability groups, there are several things that can go wrong. I'm guessing a lot of you have had moments where you failed over and all of a sudden your logins weren't, you realized you didn't have certain logins or the passwords were different or any number of these things that cause applications in your environment to fail. And when that happens, you have to scramble. You have to scramble to get those things back up. This is a list of all the things that I could list out off the top of my head that could go wrong. The next thing, and we're gonna spend some time on this today, but jobs. Well, when we do failovers, we need to check a few things. First, we need to make sure that all the jobs that are needed are on that secondary server, right? We need to ensure that they have the same steps and that the proper ones are enabled and disabled. And I'm going to show you a little trick to actually make that part a little easier, so that you don't actually have to care whether the jobs are enabled on the right server or not, right? If you're using linked servers still, which I'm sure a lot of you are, I would encourage you to find other ways to share data across systems rather than linked servers. But if these are missing on secondary replicas, then again, applications may fail. The fourth item here, server level audits and audit specifications. Not that many people seem to be using SQL audits as a feature. But it is very useful. It can help you track permissions changes, for example, or changes to objects within your database. Um, if that's not that, that exists at two levels, right? You have your database audit level specification, which bubbles up to a server level audit. Well, the database level audit will come across with with a failover, but your server level audit is not, right? You have to make sure, just like jobs and logins and linked servers, that you go out of your way to make sure those things exist on your secondary systems. My apologies for the cough. Another point that you want to know about is service broker. It's not uncommon to find service broker in an environment. When I was at SurveyMonkey, we used service broker to share data across shards. Well, in a failover, we need to make sure the endpoints exist. Otherwise, service broker just ain't happening. Then there are any server level triggers. If you're like me, you have a login trigger that only allows certain application names to connect. I.e., you have an app. Well, you need to register that app with us so that you get an app ID and connect, specifying that. This way, we know what queries are coming from which application is here, right? It's not just based on service count. Then, obviously, backup devices, anything that you're gonna need. The final one, though, well, if your certificates don't match across servers, you're going to have problems with encryption. You'll have big problems if you're using transparent data encryption. This is going to cause you a huge issue in that scenario. Say you have a TDE encrypted database. If you don't have that same certificate on all your replicas, and when I say same certificate, I don't just mean same name, but I mean same thumbprint for the certificate. Well, you're not going to be able to redo the transactions on your secondary. And if you attempt to fail over in that state, it's not going to be a fun time. You're going to have big problems, and it is going to be a pain to get out. So generally, we want to check these things, and we just want to make sure that before we do a failover, that we have all our ducks in a row and we're ready to go. This is even more important to have these checks built in if you're using, auto failover, right? If we're doing auto HA, then we're probably going to want to run some checks every few minutes, right? Or at least every few hours to reduce impact, right? Because if we do that and auto failover, well, it may be a non-issue. It may be something we come in the next day and deal with during normal business hours. Why did this fail over? But if things start failing in the middle of the night, then we're getting up. We should be getting paid. So let's look at what I went over last time. I'm just gonna minimize this here. Exit out of that. We'll get to this in a second. I pulled this up for you guys for a specific reason. So in my home lab here, I have an interesting little script here. Now, last time I was here a few months back, we actually wrote this first part live. And I gave the script to David, and he sent it out to you guys. So one of the things we're going to be using today as we do these kind of checks, sanity checks, is DBA tools. Now, if you're unaware, DBA tools is a completely free, community-built set of tools to help you manage SQL Server. I'm just going to take a quick side trip here to actually give you an idea of just how much they've built into this. So if I go back here, these are all, there's over 300 commandlets here that they've built in various categories around availability groups, SQL agent, services, DB mail, data masking, all sorts of stuff in here that can simplify your life and help you automate away some of the more tedious parts of your job. So if I go to availability groups here, right? Well, you can see that we can do everything from creating an availability group completely through PowerShell, nice and simple, to changing properties, backup preferences, to invoking a failover, right? And there are other things for replication, database mirroring, etc. So in this case today, we're going to look at jobs a little more in depth. All right. So when I initially built this, this was not a function, right? Sync logins was simply a script that you would call like any other script. I took the time, didn't take long to turn this into a function so that we could eventually pump it into its own module of just availability group checks, right? So what this function takes is a parameter, just the AG listener, or it could be a CNAME, right? I like to have my AG listeners fronted by a CNAME. So it goes CNAME, listener, and then it goes over to, you know, server, etc. Right? This way, if I need to, I can migrate to a whole new a database to a whole new availability group, and because every application has its own CNAME, well, I just repoint the CNAME at the end of that migration, and the application is none the wiser, right? I can do things behind the scenes that would be a little more difficult without that C. All right, so first thing we do in this script, we're just going to review it quick, is we have an exclusion list. These are jobs that we don't, or logins that we don't want to migrate, right? Then we get a list of replicas, and we're calling the DBA tools get-DBA AG replica, right? We pass it in the listener name as the SQL instance. I also could have used any of the actual instance names, and it pops out a list of all of those names. It actually gives us an object representing each availability group replica. From that, I created a variable called primary replicas, and I use the where object commandlet and the role property of the replica instance to determine is it a primary or a secondary. I pick out the primary and stick it into my primary replica variable. For secondary replicas, similar thing. It's just we're checking that the role is secondary, right? The next thing I do is get a list of login names. Windows, SQL, doesn't matter, right? So get-DBA login is the DBA tools commandlet that will return objects representing all of your logins. In this case, we only want the names. We don't want the rest of the properties. So we pass that to the for each object, and we just pull out the name. Right? This way I have a string array that just represents the names of the logins on the primary system. Now, it's important to note here that the way I wrote this script is it's making an assumption. And that assumption is that the primary is our source of truth. If it was working on the primary prior, when we fail over, it should work on the new primary. So all of the two functions that you're going to see in here are written the same way. In fact, the scripts are so simple to write with DBA tools that they look almost the exact same. All right, so what we're going to do in this next section where we iterate over the secondaries is we're going to compare their logins. And we're going to look for any logins on the primary that are missing on the secondaries. We don't care about doing the reverse. We don't care about taking logins that exist on the secondaries to the primaries, because when we fail back and we do the same check, we'll get those logins just from this function, automatic. So we create a loop here using the for each object commandlet for each of the secondary replicas. We compare the results in this line, or we get their logins, then we compare them in this line, and then what we do is we call the copy DBA login, pass in the names of the missing logins, also telling it to exclude system logins that we don't want to copy over, and we give it a source and destination. In this case, the actual server name of the primary replica for the source, and the actual server name of the destination replica. So once we do that, dbatools.io will fix our issue. So we're going to do a similar thing now for jobs, and then we're actually going to start running code in action. But before we look at jobs here, there's a few different ways we can manage jobs with availability groups, right? So I'm going to go back into here. And this is actually the full code here, right? So you all can still see my screen?
Yep, looks good.
Awesome. What I want to do is I want to look at, and by the way, folks, if you have questions, just send them to David. We'll answer them as we go. All right. So for our jobs, we have three of them here that we care about. We really don't care about this PowerShell one. That's just me playing around with stuff. All right. So you'll notice that I have a naming convention for my jobs, right? And that naming convention starts off with AG dash, and then one of three options: primary only, secondary only, or all replicas. Now, primary only are jobs that should only ever run on the primary, right? We only want to execute their tasks if we're running on the primary. This could be a backup job, or it could be, any job that needs to write data in one of the databases in the availability group. Secondary only are for jobs that should only ever run on our readable secondaries, right? In this case, my secondary is not readable, so I'm not going to actually ever have a job that really only runs on secondaries. Now, I'm guessing a lot of you have scrambled to enable the right jobs and disable other jobs after a failover. And you can automate that. With this naming convention, you could actually say, okay, get me a list of all jobs that have AG dash primary only in them. And we're going to enable those. And any, along with any that are just all replicas. And then, on the primary, disable any jobs that are secondary only. This naming convention allows me to easily find these jobs and actively enable or disable them based on role status of the replica. Give me one sec, need some water. All right. There's an easier way to do this, however. And I'm going to show you a neat little trick. So if I go back and I minimize out of here and I go back to my to this page. So interestingly enough, this is a function available in certain versions of SQL Server to help you determine if you're running on a primary or not. sys.ffunction.hadr is primary replica. And it takes one parameter, and that's the name of a database. This is because you could have multiple availability groups, like I do, on a single instance, on a single cluster. So you pass in one of the database names, ideally the one you're going to be working on, and then it'll tell you if it's primary or not, if you can write to it. One second, one call. All right, my apologies. Now, personally, I kind of wish that they had just said, give me the name of an availability group, or provided such an option, because then I wouldn't have to pick a database at random from my availability group. But this code, you can actually run. And here's an example of using it, right? Real easy. So if I go back into my VM here, and you can see some of that code here, but let's look at the actual job, right? So if I go into properties, I go to steps, you'll notice we have two steps here. This first one is what we're gonna be interested in. So I edit that. And you can see that same code right here. In this case, I've got a database, demo AGDB. It's got one table in it. So we declare our result variable. Then we select from that function you saw, passing in the name of that database, collect our result. If it's 0, then we know it's a secondary. If it returns the value 1, we know it's writable. So you'll notice that if it's 0 in this case, because we only want this to run on the primary, we simply throw an error. Well, there's a counterpart to that. We don't want the job to fail with an error necessarily, right? That might trigger our monitoring and alerting for failed jobs. So what we do is kind of sneaky here. I'm going to expand this out and look at the on success and on failure options here. On success, we go to the next step, just like normal. On failure, however, we quit the job reporting success. So yeah, there's an error, but we just end the job with success, right? kind of sneaky. Now, in our secondary only, if we go and look at what we've got there, we need it to be the same setup, right? Quit the job reporting success. Let's edit. And the only difference here, the only difference that we see here is this is now 1, right? Now, because the job reports success, it quits with success. When this throws an error, we're able to just have the job exit out gracefully. It just will go, oh, hey, I shouldn't be running, and stop itself. Now, we also could have used SP stop job, but the problem with that is that will actually officially cancel the job, which will be picked up by most monitoring tools as a failure. Right? If you've got jobs that run quite a lot, you don't want a million alerts in a day. I know. But this is another way, and it gives us an interesting option. What it means is because we have these job steps and the jobs themselves check what replica they should be running on and if they should run, we can just leave all the jobs enabled on all our replicas. And we know that in a failover, they're going to react appropriately, right? Now we don't have to get into this mess of enabling and disabling jobs. And by the way, I'll send you that code snippet from that job when I send the PowerShell script to David right after this virtual meeting, right? But this is going to allow us to actually have an easier time managing our jobs. And that's what we want, right? We want to move away from, having to rush to make sure everything is in order. Now, if I go back, and we're going to do some demos shortly. If I go back to our PowerShell script here, right? We will take a look at our sync SQL agent jobs function. Again, here we pass in the listener, and from there it does the same sort of thing. Now in this case, I copied the exclusion list from above, tweaked it a little bit, but we can just get rid of this. There's a specific job that we actually want to exclude, and that is PowerShell, but we don't necessarily need to. All right. So if we wanted to exclude a job, we just type the name of the job. All right. Then we could do a comma, and we could add another name. So we'll call this Jimmy's test. Right, and we can just keep adding to this list, or we could make this a parameter, right? So if I come up here and I say, I want to copy these 2 lines because we need them both, and I go here, and I do that. Now I can leave this as exclusion list, right? And we don't need it to actually be mandatory. We can just leave it. All right. In fact, I'm going to take the position away from here because we want you to explicitly specify the parameter name when you pass it in. All right. So we create our exclusion list, or we could do that. We're not going to for right now, but this is how you would easily turn some of these things into parameters, right? We do the same thing. We get the AG replicas, we, pull out the primary down here. Then we also pull out the secondaries down there. Then this is where it starts to get a little different. We call it different command line, get-dba job, right? Now, I'm setting the enable exception option here because DBA tools will actually suppress that. It'll print it out as a warning, an issue, but your script will continue to run, right? If you want to use these commandlets in a try-catch block and catch the errors so that you can handle them yourself, then you will want to use the enable exception option. We go through the same process. However, now we've got a where object. If you look up here, you'll notice that we didn't have up here a where object, right? So we're first getting the list of all the jobs, then we're excluding the ones that don't meet this pattern. And by the way, the asterisk is simply the equivalent of the percent sign if you were in TC, right? So we want a list of all the jobs that are AG related. Then we pull out just their names, right? Package it into a string array. And we're able to start actually syncing our jobs. Again, we're going to follow the same process. Primary is the source of truth, but don't overwrite the job if it's already on the secondary, right? As I said last time, I like to start things off with only constructive changes. Destructive changes lead to risk. And so before we would get comfortable with, overwriting a job with the same name on the secondary, we want to make sure that we've developed that comfort, we've had those discussions, etc. So these two functions will not overwrite anything on your secondaries. If I create a completely different login with the same name but different password as a SQL login, we will not overwrite that. These two functions will not resolve that issue. But for any logins or jobs that are missing, they will take care of this. All right. So once we've identified the missing jobs, then we can copy it, the DBA agent job. And by the way, if you want to see in DBA tools the list of copy jobs, well, they're right at the top. DBA's tool started off as a way of helping you migrate. And they will actually, if you're doing a server-to-server migration or springing up a new availability group replica, and you want to make sure that you copy every object from your primary replica over, well, have they got a tool for you. One line of code will bring over all the other stuff that you saw in that list. We can even bring over the databases, or we can exclude it. Let's bring over all the objects, but not the databases, right? You can with this. So this is going to make it a lot similar or a lot simpler to bring up a secondary replica and know that it is configured the same. This will save you time. And it's just start-dba migration. You want a simple example? Here you go. All right, this is why DBA Tools is so powerful, because we can do things quickly with minimal effort on our part. So if I go back to my script here. So we are going to sync here. We're going to call both of these functions, and I'm passing in the name of the availability group listener, demo SQL 2019. And by the way, this script will work on versions of SQL Server going back to 2012 when availability groups first came out. So let's look at the current state of our environment. So in terms of logins, what we have is we have a couple interesting ones. We have primary only, right? And the thing is, so I'm going to connect directly to A and B here. And then I'm going to disconnect from this guy for a second. So I want to show you logins side by side. We'll do the same for jobs, right? You'll notice that the primary only and both replicas, these two logins, they don't exist on both right now, right? They only exist on the primary. That's why this one is labeled primary only. Both replicas, both of these logins should actually exist on both, but they don't. So let's look at jobs. All right, so if we go and minimize this and pull up our jobs here, you'll see that our AG replicas are actually in the same state, right? They don't exist. Now this PowerShell job here, well, that's meant to only live on that one server, right? We're going to assume that. So let's run our checks. Right, I come over here, and I'm just going to run this script as it is, right? And we'll give it a minute. It may take a minute or two to run. Ah, you see this? This is an example of DBA tools without enabled exceptions. So what I need to do is I need to go to SQL 2019B, and I'm going to have to actually enable mixed mode, right? So we found a configuration issue between the two. Now, unfortunately, I'm going to have to restart the service, but that's okay. We'll just let this do its thing real quick. It'll take a minute, and then we'll run our script again. So once this comes back up, what we're going to do is we're going to check both SQL agent and the SQL Server service, just make sure that we're able to get back in, everything came up fine, and that we have no issues before we move on to the next part. So in usual fashion, this is taking a little bit to stop the MS SQL service. Hopefully it finishes. Finished, now it's trying to start. Good. All right. So I'm going to refresh that just to be, there we go. Agent came back up, right? So now, go back here. And this will take a minute. Hopefully we won't run into the same error that we did before. It should give us a little indication of, kind of what it did just from, there we go. So you can see that the primary only login was successful. the agent jobs were successful. All right, so let's do a refresh and see what happens. Let's start off with jobs. So we're going to refresh this. We're going to go here. And now you'll see that all our jobs are copied over. They're all enabled. We don't need to worry about them. All right. And let's look at logins. All right. We've got our primary login, primary only, and we've got our other login, which is really badly named. All right. So we've got both of these logins. Now, because we've checked these things, we're not using service broker, we don't have TDE or certificates that might trip us up. We can actually initiate a real failover. Right? Now, we could do one of two things with this script, but you know, we could, in this case, for right now, we're just gonna say, okay, this is the script we're using for failovers. We're gonna run these checks before we do any sort of failover, and we could actually check their output because they do have output that comes from dbatools.io, specifically the copy commands that we're running. Right? Now, when you're failing over an availability group via invoke-dba-ag failover in dbatools.io, you are going to want to connect to the specific instance that you want to fail over to. You may or may not want to specify the availability group name. If you've got multiple availability groups on a system, on a replica, then, or instance, I should say, then what will happen is if you don't specify a list, and this can be an array, we could just add more to it, it will fail over every single availability group on that instance to itself. That may not be ideal. So what we do is instead we specify explicitly the availability group or availability groups that we want to fail over. You'll also notice I'm using dash force, right? If I don't have this, what's going to happen is it's going to prompt me for confirmation. So I go here, I run this, it takes a minute, and then this thing pops up. Are you sure you want to perform this action? Gracefully failing over SQL 2019 demo on target SQL 2019A. No, right? We see that it's gone through, it's looked, it's skipped all our logins, and it's skipped all our jobs. Although this time it did bring the PowerShell job over, which is fine because I didn't put in interesting. There's a bug in my job thing because it did bring that over this time. All right, we'll look at that quickly. So the exclusion list is there. No, that's not a bug. Why did it bring it over? All right, I'll look into that in a minute. But we want to fail over, and we don't want to go through that confirmation. We've decided that we absolutely want to fail over. So we use the dash force option. Now, I really don't recommend doing this with dash force. Really, what that could potentially do is Well, you've got an asynchronous replica and you accidentally log in, you accidentally specify that server and you go to initiate a failover. Well, if that server is behind, you just incurred data loss and created a bunch of issues, right? So you need to be careful with this. In this case, both replicas are synchronous, right? So when I run this, the failover will just, ah, all right? That's because it's A. So if I specify B, then what'll happen is it'll go through the process, and when it's done, it's actually going to give us an object, show us an object with properties that represent the state. You can see that right here. Computer name 2019B, the instance name, the new role that it's assigned, right? So the replica role, and it's telling us and providing confirmation that it did in fact fail over correctly. We can verify that. So if we go here and we expand, because we know we were on A before, right? We'll see that A is now the secondary, right? Exactly what we'd expect. And this, we'll see on the next one that it is in fact primary. Now we could check this stuff via DBA tools cmdlets too, but just for time's sake here. All right, we know we've run. We know we've worked. So now let's go and on B, let's run that secondary only job. You see how this thing looks, right? So B is the primary, so this should not run, right? We'll start it at step 1. We'll let it do its thing, and it completed. But if let's look at the job history now and see how this looks. All right, we get a little caution thing there. That's normal. And if I make this bigger, we'll read what it says. All right. Last step to run was step 1, gracefully fail if not AG secondary. So what do we see in here? We see SQL is exiting gracefully. This is not a secondary replica. The state failed, right? So that looks good. All right. So now let's do the same thing for primary, because this is now the primary. We'll just start that off at the same step. It'll do its thing, complete. And because it's the primary, we had a fully successful run, right? Now let's fail back. All right, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna change this to A. We're also gonna create, before we actually run this, we're gonna create another login over here on B. And we're just gonna call this login Scuba. Scuba is a friend of mine. He's really 6 dachshunds in a human suit. And we're just going to use generic demo password. That is not the actual password. And he is going to be well, nothing there. We're going to give him some permissions. Make sure that those permissions come over. He can write data, but he cannot read it. All right? So now we go back and we're going to run this script, and he is going to pop over with us. right? So everything looks good. 2019A, that's the server we want to go to. So SQL 2019A does not have mixed mode available. That is interesting because we have, oh, that's why these can't actually log in. So Scuba was brought over, but he can't log in because mixed mode is not enabled. So the login came over, it's just not usable. But we now have Scuba. So you can see how when we do these checks and these failovers, we can fix our problems. We can first off identify issues. We can fix those issues without having to manually intervene. Now, imagine if there were, say, 20 logins on here, and I didn't have a script that would copy the missing ones over for me, right? Or even identify them. I would have to go in by hand and do that. If we've got more than 2 replicas, it's going to become time consuming, and we're going to end up with a spreadsheet, right? Yet I can run a script that checks these things in less than a minute and fixes the issues versus spending an hour trying to get all this stuff straightened out and be ready for a failover. Why do I want to spend my time to waste, right? I want to do this as quickly and efficiently for the company. Now, the other thing is I can take this script, right? I can leave off the failover. And I can set this to run as an agent job. And I can do that in one of 2 ways, or 3 ways actually. I could schedule this to run every minute under Windows Task Manager and have it email me the results. I could store these in variables simply by typing login results equal sync logins, right? And then I could use the .NET framework to send out an email to myself if there's an issue, and only if there's an issue. And that way create an actual alert. Hey, there's a difference here that we need to see. Another way I could do this is to create down here under SQL agent, I could create a new job. And that's why this guy exists here, right? So there's 2 ways to do this. And this is a job that's designed to fail, right? We could use this as a PowerShell job step. I honestly don't recommend that because some of your PowerShell errors in script will not actually get bubbled up as output. In this case, dividing 1 by 0 will, but that may not always be the case. The other option is to make this an operating system command, right? And in here, you just run you call your script, you call PowerShell and pass it the location of your script. Now, ideally, those scripts are on a share somewhere, so you've got 1 copy for all your replicas, right? So if I have a util server, I stick the scripts on there, and it's got a share called AG PowerShell scripts. And then I can pass the script in via UNC path. And this will solve your issue. So it is exactly 1 hour since we started. And this is the last thing. So I guess let's open it up to questions. People were kind of quiet.
Okay. Let's see, I've got a bunch of good questions in here.
All
One,
right.
everybody, the recording is in high res, so that'll make sure that everybody can see all the details in there. I'll have that up on YouTube a little bit later today. Um, okay, let's see. Why do we need to use mixed mode?
Well, you don't. You don't have to use mixed mode for this. You can actually, it will work with Windows logins as well. I was just using mixed mode to quickly be able to create test logins to show you guys.
Okay, cool. Let's see. What is the difference between dash force and dash confirm dollar failover with invoke DBA failover?
Between dash force and dash confirm dollar failover. Well, so force just says, hey, I don't care about the state. I'm going to ignore everything, every safety precaution. You could actually use exactly what you described. Confirm with saying, yes, true. I want to confirm this. So in that case, that would be a safer method. I do not recommend using force with invoke dash DDA AG failover. That answer the question?
Yeah. Okay.
Confirm, let me make one addition. Confirm will essentially not force you to fail over if you're not in a synchronized state. Force just says, forget it, we're doing it.
Cool. Okay. Let's see. One more question here. So get DBA agent job for the synced logins is any definition checked or just the object existence by name?
In this case, just the object existence by name. And the reason for that is this. If there is a difference in the code, I think we need to take a look and see which is the most up-to-date version, right? We don't want to wipe out a new version with an older version. And it is possible if you've failed around a few times that and people have done updates, but they haven't pushed that job out to every server. They just put it on whatever the primary was at the time, that you could have different versions on different servers. And that is a problem.
Yeah, it makes life interesting that way. Okay.
Yeah.
How frequently do you recommend synchronizing things like jobs, logins, stuff like that?
So logins I tend to do more often. In our environment, we do it every 15 minutes. Jobs, you can make a case for doing it once a day, right? But because the likelihood of you creating jobs throughout the day and it being an issue if they're not over on the secondary server is lower. I would generally recommend for jobs that you would do it, say, every hour. I mean, it's really, to run this is really no, it's a low impact, low performance hit script. It doesn't really harm your performance.
Yeah. Okay. So for everybody, Brandon's script will be shared. The recording will be up on YouTube. It'll also be linked at the hadr.pass.org site under Meeting Archive. The script will also be posted under there as well. And I'm going to go triple check to make sure I posted the last script. If I didn't, I'll make sure I get that up there. I think I did, but I want to quadruple check.
Well, I mean, the script is the same. Just replace it with this version.
Okay,
Right?
even better.
Make life easier for you.
Exactly. Cool. Are there any other questions?
Was this useful to people?
Oh, incredibly useful. Yeah, this is I mean, I've been working with availability groups for a long time, and this level of automation and sophistication it should be baked in the product, but you didn't hear that from me. Uh,
Yeah.
quite frankly, this is the kind of stuff to where you really can turn this stuff on and begin to treat it as a platform and not really have to worry nearly as much with this level of detail. At this point, it becomes self-resilient, self-healing almost, where the day-to-day interaction with this, with routine failovers, it's honestly better. It's a lot better than what it
Yep.
used to be.
And the other thing is, once you start implementing stuff like this and you get your hands on it and you start to play around, it honestly it changes how you think about problems in your environment.
Well,
And
it gives you the ammunition to figure out, hey, this is a routine thing that I've had to click through more than once. I do have the power to do something about this, so I can just
yes,
automate it.
exactly. It's when you start realizing that you can automate things, and it's not actually that difficult. You just have to think about things in a slightly different way. Then all of a sudden you end up with way less issues in your environment.
Exactly. Your mindset goes from, well, this is annoying to how can I fix this so I never have to worry about it again?
Yeah.
And that's powerful. And the problem is once you start down this road, you generally don't stop.
No. I mean, look at how far DBA Tools has come.
Oh my goodness.
Man,
Uh,
it's incredible.
that package. So for the DBA Tools team out there, if you are listening, thank you from the bottom of my heart and from the bottom of many DBA's hearts out there.
I will raise my water glass to that.
It's an incredible tool, and that's the beauty of it. It is a framework with which, if you can dream of a new purpose to build on top of it with, it makes it easy.
Yeah, the other thing I'd mention too is if anyone really wants to learn PowerShell and get really good at it, the DBA Tools folks will help you learn. They will they look for people to help them build out more commandlets, etc. And they will introduce you to concepts and help walk you through creating those commandlets. They will give you the resources if you are willing to spend some time learning and helping to make DBA tools better.
It's incredible, and they've also got a new book out, Learn DBA Tools in a Month of Lunches.
Yes, highly recommend it.
Yeah, so we do not make a cent from upselling any of their stuff. We just believe in it.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, thank you for your time. I'll get this up on YouTube as soon as the rendering is done. I'll get the script out on the site as soon as I receive it from you. And
All
we are incredibly happy to have had you present today. So now the fun part is, when's the next one, right?
right. When is the next one?
You give me a topic, and actually, while everybody's still on the recording here, if you have a topic that you'd like to see in this HADR virtual chapter, or arguably any of the other virtual chapters, let me know. Because if you have a great topic, either I can come up with something, or there's a bunch of great presenters in this community that we will write a presentation just for you, and we'll get this out there for everybody. Because
Yeah.
chances are, if you've got the question, somebody else has already come up with it as well, and there may be really good answers out there. And if there's not, then that's more information we can get out to the community.
So I have a topic for you.
Let's hear it.
It's actually I will be presenting this come pass. Automating availability group deployments with PowerShell desired state config.
You want to do a dry run before the PASS Summit,
We might be
or
able to.
or a run after the PASS Summit?
Probably best to do after, just because of the contract.
Cool. Will you let me know which month, and we'll make it happen.
Uh, that same month or the one after?
Uh, your call. Yeah,
But
just shoot me an email.
yeah.
Let me know what works best. We'll go ahead and get it on the calendar.
All right, sounds good.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds like fun.
Oh, it will be.
I'll be sure to heckle.
Please do.
Awesome. Well, thank you again. Thanks for everybody who attended the session, or thanks for anybody who's watching this after the fact in the recording. And we'll see you next month.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.